Hey there viewers, I'm going to show you how I repaired the transmission on my Troy-Bilt 21-inch walk-behind self-propelled mower. A pin inside the transmission broke, meaning that the main gear inside the transmission couldn't engage the axle, allowing the front wheels to turn. I do have to warn you though that this pin is no longer available from Troy-Bilt, and when I did my research I couldn't find a cross-reference number anywhere. So I don't think it's going to be available as an original equipment replacement part. So you'll probably have to either source one on your own or do what I did and make one. The main point of this is just to show you that these transmissions can be repaired instead of replaced, and with a little bit of homework it can be done for just a few bucks. The transmission itself, replacement transmission, is 120 bucks. If you don't want to do it yourself, you probably have to pay another 100 to get it installed. And I spent $3 making a pin and about 2 hours of time to get it repaired, and the mower's back in business. So something for you to think about. I also wanted to mention that I knew it was a transmission failure because I didn't have a cable problem, I didn't have a belt problem, I didn't have an adjustment problem, and I didn't have a problem with the front wheels. All those things were working fine. It was quite clearly internal to the transmission, and that's what prompted me to take the transmission apart and look inside. So I will, for those of you who just want to very quickly get to the point, I'll show you, the failure and what you need to replace to fix it. And then for those of you who would like a little bit more information, I will go into a little bit more detail, show you, inside the transmission and how to take it apart and put it back together, and then give you a couple of tips along the way to make it a little bit easier for you. So I hope this helps, and thanks for watching. So for those of you who just want to know what the failure was, it was this drive pin, this pin right here. That pin is what locks the axle to the gear, and that gear is what this worm gear turns to turn the axle. So when I separated the cases, this is the bottom half of the case, it's filled with, I don't know, maybe 15 milliliters of gear oil. I found the pieces of the roll pin, or of the pin, that had broken, and that's when I knew that I was on the right track to being able to repair this. The pin is 3 millimeters by 35 millimeters, so it's an 1/8 inch pin, and I don't know, about 2.5 inches long or so. Rather 1.5 inches long or so. So 3 millimeters by 35 millimeters. And if you replace that pin, you'll be back in business. Taking the transmission off is pretty straightforward. Pull your wheels off, take these gears off, take the roll pins out, take the shield off. Then you'll take the axle assembly off of the side of the mower. There's a nut on the back side of the bolt, so you'll have to take that off. Of course, take your belt off and your cable off, and that's pretty much it. So once you have your transmission off, you'll have it on the bench. This is what it's going to look like. Of course, you'll have to take the top and bottom of your pulley off, and so this is the shaft that the belt turns. This is the lever arm that slides the gear over. And then, of course, you've got your two case halves. So I guess the first thing that you'd want to do would be to separate the cases. Take all your screws out of the bottom, and then you'll have to pry this apart. And it's kind of tough to get off at first because they use what I can only characterize as an industrial grade sealant to hold everything together. And once you get the bottom off and separated, you need to be aware of the fact that there's going to be a few milliliters of oil in the bottom case. It's heavy gear oil. So you'll either want to capture that if you want to reuse it, or just catch it so that you don't want to make a mess. Here on the bottom you can see that there's a place for this worm gear to go, and then there's another place for this fork to go. So that's over here on this side. And other than that, there's nothing else in there. I've already cleaned all the gasket material off of this, but yours will look quite a bit different when you take it apart, because they put a fair amount of sealant on there. So this is what the inside looks like. You can see that you've got your worm drive gear here, and this is the fork, and this fork is attached to this lever arm. And what happens is when you pull the cable which comes through here and pull on the lever, it slides that gear over, and the gear has a spring behind it, and there's a pin. The pin that I showed you goes through here, and that stops the gear from sliding over any further, and also puts tension on the spring, causing this to return home when you let go of the lever on the handle of the mower. So when you push the lever, it pushes the gear over, that engages the worm gear, and then when the worm gear turns, it turns the axle. So that's it. It's beautifully simple. And then you just have two washers over here, two bushings, one on each side, and that's pretty much it. So the next thing that you need to do is get this lever arm off. It is press fit onto the fork here. It's press fit on there, so you have to pry up on it and pull it off. And you can see it just slides in there. And you can see, I think, that the top of the fork is just tapered. And on mine there was a circlip, spring clip on the top here that I had to get off. So make sure you don't lose that when you get it off. And then there's your fork. And then at this point you should be able to just lift the top half, or actually you'll have to pry it off because of the gasket material. And just take that off. And there's nothing spectacular in there. That's where the O-ring is. So yours will either still be in there, or it'll be on the bottom of the lever here. And then what you'll need to do is take note of the position of all your washers, and then slide the fork off, and then you'll be able to slide the gear over. Now I have my replacement pin in there for demonstration purposes, but I'll show you. So this is the O-ring that's in the housing that I talked about. And then when I separated the cases, in the bottom half of the case, inside, under all the oil, I found the broken pin. And there are the three pieces that used to look like that. And they were all in there. And there's the hole that the pin goes in. So I knew I was on the right track when I saw that. So as I said, I couldn't find a replacement pin. It's no longer available from MTD, and there were no cross references, and I couldn't find one the appropriate length locally. So I just went ahead and got a high-speed steel drill bit and cut it to 35 millimeters in length. It's a 3 millimeter or 1/8 inch diameter by 35 millimeters, and I just cut that to size, and you can see that it will fit in this hole absolutely perfectly. And the other important thing is, the reason I think that it's 35 millimeters is because 35 millimeters is the inside diameter of this gear, so that when the assembly is sort of in the neutral state, the pin is held in place and won't slide out or flop around. And you can see how the pin pushes up against the spring, and that's what causes this gear to spring back when you let go of the lever on the handle. And if you look inside, you can see all the notches and detents that catch the pin, which is what actually locks it and causes the axle to turn. So that's that. It's a pretty simple arrangement, and it works pretty well. It's just that this pin, if you abuse it, isn't very durable. So in order to get everything back together, it's the reverse of taking it apart. You'll need to get these two washers here separated, because the bottom half of the case is where these two washers here are going to go in the case, and then this one goes up against the gear. So it goes like that. Probably would be easier if I use this. There we go. At this point, when you're getting ready to put it back together, take your fork and slide the fork over the axle, and then put the bottom of the fork in that opening on the bottom of the case that I showed you. It sits right in there. And the fork is centered over the middle of the axle. It doesn't go all the way over like that. It just rides right in the middle like that. So once you have that in, you can take the top half of your case. Of course, by now you would have already put your gasket material all the way around. Take your top half of your case, wiggle it in until the worm gear meshes up with the gear, as well as settles down in the recess in the bottom case. And sometimes it can be a little bit tricky. There we go. So now you can see that it's seated, and I could put all my screws in, make sure that my gasket material's all in there. And then, since you probably recall, I said that this is a press fit, so there's some gasket material here. I'm assuming that what they did was they put some sealant around here, and then this just presses on, and you'll be able to see the top of the fork protruding through the lever, and then you'll press this all the way down until it seals, but doesn't bind, and then that's it. You can put your spring clip back on here, maybe put a dab of sealant on the top of that as well, and then you just want to verify that it works. And the way that you would do that is quite simply by pushing your lever arm over until it engages. And then you can see that the shaft is turning when the belt drive is turning, and that turns the axle. So that's your self-propulsion. And then when you let go of the lever, the spring pushes the gear back, and you got nothing. So that's it. Pretty basic repair. And hopefully that pin will hold up. So I'm going to go ahead and throw it together, and we'll see if it works.